So good evening. Thank you. And just a couple of information in order to give you the possibility to prepare yourself. Tomorrow afternoon, we are moving to another location, very close from here, is only 7 minutes walking, and is the representative of the European Commission in Rome. So we are moving after the ambassador question time, we are moving there, and it will start at 3 o'clock. Then tomorrow is Tuesday, but Wednesday we have a surprise. At 8 o'clock you are invited to a Diplo pizza party. All of you will be a gathering together at 8 o'clock in the Bar del Fico that is very close to Piazza Navona. So please just sign. We want to know how many of you will participate, okay? This afternoon, after this session, we have one session dedicated to sustainability in movement. It means we're going to talk about the future of transport, the future of electrification of cars, smart cities, and everything that is connected to battery, rare earth minerals. So it's going to be a very interesting topic for the future. It will be with the translation, in Italian with translation. And today I'm honored to introduce a session that is, as I said, is an hybrid session, half in Italian and half in English. And the title is Terrorism and Underdevelopment in Sub-Saharan Africa. The moderator will be Fabrizio Lobasso, that is a Minister Plenipotenziario at the Italian Foreign Ministry, and is Director of the Mondialization of the area of Sub-Sahara and Africa Horn. I give the floor to Ministro Lobasso, and I wish you a good session.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me and all the beloved guests from remote and here in person. I'm very glad to be here also because probably I can say that I have been seeing the growth, the incredible growth of this initiative, which is Festival della Diplomazia, since the very beginning, when I was invited as the head of the diplomatic examination office, and I had to speak about the beauty of the diplomatic career. Then many years have passed, and we are here, and we're talking about Africa and terrorism with splendid guests, and I have to say that Festival of Diplomacia deserve it, so a very, very big applause to all of them. Please. Today we focus our attention on an issue that it's an everlasting, an evergreen, unfortunately, and which is terrorism and Sub-Saharan Africa. Me, myself, as a Deputy Director for African continent, Sub-Saharan continent, I would say mainly, I have to say that I am dealing with the issue, at least I have been dealing for 3 years since I came back from Khartoum, Sudan, where I was ambassador there for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. Today, we will focus our attention in company with really distinguished and highest level guests. I will start by listing them, and then time after time I will pass the word and I will give the floor. And as our host said, please, in the end, intervene, try to show your reflections about that, because I've always said when I do classes, the best part of a meeting like that is not what we say from this part, but it's the sharing that you may grant us with your impressions, your idea, your insight. Today we will have, I hope to say them in order, then according to the electronic and telematic necessity, maybe we can change places, but we will start with our friend and even former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Emanuela Del Re, which, as you know, today is special representative of the European Union for the Sahel. And if I well understood, we will have a remote, probably also pre-recorded speech from her part. Then on our list, we have a very famous personage, which is former Sakharov Prize, and again, online, and she is Hawa Ibrahim. She's a very important lawyer for human rights. Then I have on my left Professor Andrea Manciulli, which is one of the pillars of the foundation that probably you all know. The name is MEDOR, which is very, very inside all this kind of issues in the Mediterranean area, in the MENA area. And Andrea Manciulli has been also one of the the concoctor of the 2015 anti-terrorism decree, and also a special of the president group of the MENA, Middle East and North Africa, at the NATO, concerning the Islamic threat and the Islamic issues. Then we will have, again by remote, our friend and colleague Domenico Bruzzone, which is working in Burkina Faso, that, as you know, probably since some weeks again has raised up on the newspapers for, again, a coup d'etat that allowed international community to, again, to question also our way of dealing with the Sahel and what we're going to do for the next months. And is working with the Agency of International Cooperation and Development, AICS, which is a part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as you know. And then in the end, we will have Abdelkader Filali, who is General Director of the International Center of Research for the Prevention of Children Soldiers, Children in War, which unfortunately, as far as Africa is concerned, is still a very, very horrible and heinous plague, especially in rural areas in some countries where this fundamental rights, this human rights, this probably one of the most important, I would say, jus cogens part still is violated by institutional and non-institutional group fighting. And it comes from the IRCPCS Institute in Dakhla. Okay, we are ready to start. I'm very happy to see so many of you. Having fulfilled room is always exalting for every speaker and every participant, so that means back to normality. Fortunately, human contact cannot be replaced by remote or telematic issues. So, let's see if our friend and our beloved Emanuela Del Re is ready, or the video is ready in order to listen to her world, given that she's doing a fantastic job in this moment in cooperation with member states and the Coalition for Sahel, Alliance for Sahel, the G5 for the Sahel. And so she is absolutely of the utmost importance for the future of the region. Regia, video.
very present because I'm at the Peace and Security Forum in Dakar, and I wish I were there, because this particular approach, I think, it reflects exactly what the European Union is trying to identify now as its own strategy in terms of efficacy and the resolution of the problems. In fact, in its integrated strategy for the Sahel that was defined last year, I would like to say the most important political concept that emerges is the need to realize the nexus between security and development through governance, through the reconstruction of the state, through the institution of a state of law, and especially a welfare state that really votes. The reason why this particular concept, and therefore all the strategies in terms of investment of funds and also resources are going in this direction, focused on in particular governance, derives from the fact that we have realized that terrorism is not just a question of violence. Terrorism is in the Sahel and Sub-Saharan Africa is much more defined. In the Sahel, it's able, because of the lack of governance and the lack of presence of the state, it is able to offer communities a sort of alternative welfare state that somehow solves the everyday problems of the community, offering, for instance, access to very basic services, and especially an opportunity of realization for the youth that is, of course, eluded by the idea of participating in some activities that can produce revenue. This is the real serious issue that we are trying to fight with our strategies. It is not easy also because in terms of obtaining results in this particular field, we certainly need the collaboration of the states. And as you very well know, in particular in the region that I am now covering, which is the Sahel in particular, states are fighting and struggling to find their own dimension. There have been several data. There are immense problems related to poverty, food security, movements of people in terms of refugees and IDPs, climate effects which are devastating, and therefore it is very difficult to be efficient and to identify the proper strategies. I have to say that the European Union is very capable, especially in humanitarian aid. We are still the main partner of the countries of the Sahel in terms of aid, and we want to be partners and continue to be the main partners of the countries of the Sahel in terms of construction of democracies, and especially be at the side of the population of Sahel in terms of access to basic services to somehow fight this illusion provided by terrorists from within. It is a very complex situation, and I want to say as a political personal concept that we have to, at the moment, fight against simplification. We have to see the complexity, we have to focus on the complexity of the situation to find appropriate results. Also because at the moment, not only we are fighting against the major problems I just mentioned, but we're also fighting against strategies of disinformation used, for instance, by Russia in terms of warfare, systems of warfare, and also the idea of deconstructing the relationship that we have created with the European Union and the countries of the Sahel over the years in name of an exploitation that certainly is not dedicated to development. Therefore, what I can say is that we have to be united, that we have to see things in their complexity. In fact, the European Union strategy is quite complex in the sense that it really faces every single aspect of the needs of the populations of the Sahel. But this is the time in which, of course, we are most of all trying to work on the concept of leadership, trying to give our best in terms of partners, because we are working with partners to work with the country of the Sahel, and at the same time, we want to coach, meaning that we are really engaged in trying to develop strategies together with our partners in the Sahel and make sure that these strategies become must be fought not only through security measures, but also with a solid system of governance that can really fight against the ability of these groups, which are not always terrorists, but a mixture between criminals and terrorists, sometimes criminals, also very small in some cases, but anyway very effective because the territories are immense and there is a great difficulty in controlling them, and fight against their ability to really subjugate the communities by offering them an alternative welfare state that doesn't work, will never be durable and will never give an opportunity for the communities of the Sahel to grow and to be prosperous. So thank you very much for discussing these issues, and I wish you all the best for your discussion. And obviously, the more we discuss these issues, the better it is, because unfortunately, Africa is still out of all the global debates. It's very marginal, very discriminated, and I think that the more Africa is needed in every discourse that we are facing nowadays, especially with the crisis of global water that we are facing. For the new generations that are demanding an acceleration of this.
Thank you to Professor Emanuela Del Re. I was sure, because I've been knowing her since years, working together at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that she could have touched some important issues that increase enormously the idea of terrorism, of Sahel, of Sub-Saharan Africa. And I would like to highlight especially a couple of issues that came out from her speech. First of all, probably you have noticed that she used more than once the term integrated approach, integration approach. Fortunately now, institution and non-institutional organization, they have understood that terrorism may be an alibi, that ideology only as the only source of terrorism, of radicalization, of violent extremism may just be a little part of the problem. But here we are talking of the absence of two fundamental issues. First, primary needs of people, inter and intra-communitarian fights for survival. And the second is the lack of state, the lack of institutions. If the institutions and the state is not there, somebody will come and rescue, as we may say ironically, and rescue people there in order to fulfill their primary needs. That's why we are talking about values, we are talking about very deep, important interests. We are talking about human rights and fundamental freedoms. That's why I think it could be more than appropriate if our director, Regia, is on. In theory, we should have lawyer Hawa Ibrahim, Premio Sakharov, in line. Do we have her now at the moment? No. She's not there. Do we have any news? Some problems in connection. So we hope she can come back and stay with us, because I'm sure I've heard her and I know, just the issue we are talking about. So it's my pleasure to leave the floor to one of the most important experts, I would say, we have in Italy, in Europe, on radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism, which is Professor Andrea Manciulli, as I said, now working at the Fondazione Medor, but it's former, a lot of things. And I'm sure that you will gain an incredible advantage by listening to his words. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Io intanto mi scuso, ma parlerò in italiano. Ho sentito con grande attenzione le parole della ex collega, perché io sono stato parlamentare insieme a lei, del Re. Ha detto una cosa molto giusta, che in tutto il Sahel il terrorismo si è inserito nelle faglie di stati con maggiore difficoltà di controllo del proprio territorio e di fragile statalità. Credo sia molto importante affermare questo principio, ma visto che siete, giovani studiosi e spero che troverete passione per questa materia, perché purtroppo il terrorismo di matrice jihadista è una piaga non conclusa e per la quale c'è bisogno di molte persone che sentano la passione di combatterlo, si commetterebbe un grande errore se pensassimo che il Sahel è un fenomeno isolato, perché in realtà il mondo del terrorismo di matrice jihadista ha una sua strategia. Bin Laden nel 2004 scrisse, abbiamo saputo che quel programma era effettivamente opera sua e di al-Zawahiri quando Bin Laden è stato ucciso e catturato, nel covo di Abbottabad, perché fino a quel momento la cosa era solo sospettata, ma ha scritto un breve programma dal titolo abbastanza importante, evocativo, perché si intitola Per un nuovo ordine mondiale, titolo altisonante, che è fondato su alcune linee molto brevi ma molto chiare. Una di queste linee è appunto che il qaedismo originario, all'epoca ancora Daesh non esisteva, Daesh è una derivazione del qaedismo, che poi abbiamo visto in tutta la sua violenza e anche nella sua statalità. Quando vorrete, sarò contento un giorno di fare una lezione su questo, cioè su come Daesh è nata da Al-Qaeda. Oggi bisogna andare un po' più di corsa, però è importante che voi capiate un fatto. Nel programma di Bin Laden del 2004 c'era scritto che Al-Qaeda doveva colpire l'Occidente creando una proliferazione globale di fronti. Cioè lui dice chiaramente: noi non possiamo rivolgerci con uno scontro frontale verso l'Occidente e i suoi valori. Noi dobbiamo farlo sanguinare come fanno le sanguisughe quando si attaccano a un corpo, in diversi ambiti. E dobbiamo scegliere il punto in cui ci attacchiamo esattamente andando alla ricerca di quei luoghi nei quali la frattura fra lo Stato e la statualità e la vita delle persone diventa più difficile. E se voi oggi fate questo sforzo, perché è molto semplice, vi mettete a guardare la cartina del mondo e riflettete un attimo su quali sono i luoghi nel quale il terrorismo di matrice jihadista esiste e per certi versi prolifera, vi accorgerete che sono tutti luoghi di questa natura. La Somalia, lo Yemen, Siria e Iraq, alcune parti dell'Asia dove, come si può dire, le vicende di statualità sono importanti. Anche la Cina recentemente ha conosciuto, come si può dire, una forte implementazione della battaglia al terrorismo, anche se loro lo fanno, molto in silenzio. Però, quelli che si occupano davvero di queste cose sanno che la provincia uigura, che è una zona popolata da una minoranza turcofona, molto vicina, a altri paesi, lo stesso, di lingua turcofona, prossimi alla Cina, e che quindi ha una sua natura, di rivendicazione da parte, diciamo, di una parte di popolazione che non si riconosce nell'impero cinese. Questo concetto che noi nella NATO, io per la NATO ho scritto un rapporto sul terrorismo di matrice jihadista che è un po' l'architrave operativo dell'antiterrorismo. Voi sapete che la NATO non si occupava di terrorismo, ha cominciato a occuparsi di terrorismo col 2001, perché nel 2001 fu invocato l'articolo 5 della NATO, che è quello, diciamo, che legittimò l'intervento in Afghanistan, e da allora, come si può dire, si è cominciato a occupare dal punto di vista narrativo e teorico, diciamo, di come supportare ideologicamente la lotta al terrorismo. Io sono stato, diciamo, uno dei protagonisti di quella fase e coniammo una definizione strategica, che è la definizione dei cosiddetti spazi vuoti. Gli spazi vuoti dal punto di vista della strategia militare nella lotta antiterrorismo sono la minaccia più grande. Oggi, se si vuole, e qui è il punto, se si guarda, diciamo, nei documenti ufficiali, il Sahel è diventato uno dei luoghi a più alta intensità non solo di presenza del terrorismo, ma anche, come si può dire, di possibile verticalizzazione del terrorismo, perché il Sahel ha tutte le caratteristiche che in questi anni sono paradossalmente sempre peggiorate. Il terrorismo comincia a attecchire in quest'area, bisogna dire, diciamo, le cose come stanno, quando comincia il primo prosciugamento del lago Chad. Questa è una zona a forte nomadismo pastorale e nomadismo di traffico. Scrivetevi bene questa cosa, nomadismo di traffico, perché ci torneremo alla fine, diciamo, del mio ragionamento, e è una delle principali forme di preoccupazione per il futuro. Quindi questa zona diventa una zona nella quale la popolazione soffre, non ha più come far bere le proprie mandrie, è in difficoltà dal punto di vista economico, e la Del Re diceva: i terroristi sostituiscono il welfare. È un'affermazione vera, un po', diciamo, forzata. In realtà non sono tanto i terroristi che fanno questo. È una certa forma di islamismo iperradicale, politico, che va a sfidare la constituency, diciamo, del potere locale, così come è successo da molte parti, non solo nel Sahel, e offre, come si può dire, una vita quotidiana di base che in cambio del radicalismo propone una forma di welfare minimo. Il medico di base che ogni tanto viene, la scuola che però è coranica, e offre, come si può dire, una via attraverso la radicalizzazione. Non è che tutti questi radicalizzati siano terroristi, si farebbe un grave errore se si considerasse tutto uguale. Si può essere radicali ma nello stesso tempo non terroristi. Bisogna essere sempre precisi quando si combatte il terrorismo, se no si finisce per fare un favore anche, diciamo, a chi può essere il lievito di chi poi sceglie la via del terrorismo. E in questo sostrato di radicalismo crescente, per questi motivi, arrivano le organizzazioni terroristiche che in qualche maniera combattono contro il supporto che l'Occidente sta portando agli stati nazionali della zona del Sahel. Così arriva il terrorismo in quell'area. Il terrorismo all'inizio ha bersagli precisi, per esempio la presenza francese, che in quest'area, essendo quasi tutte colonie ex francesi, era molto forte, e comincia, come si può dire, a attaccare gli avamposti della presenza coloniale e dello Stato che è connivente con la convivenza coloniale. Perché ora il Sahel è diventato pericolosissimo? Perché quest'area, proprio per le difficoltà economiche che ha, e anche per la storicità che ha. Molti di voi avranno visto film sullo schiavismo americano. E forse vi ricorderete, diciamo, che in alcuni di questi film si racconta di come venivano presi gli esseri umani che poi venivano portati in America. Erano quasi sempre quelli che facevano, diciamo, la colletta degli schiavi, erano quasi sempre popolazioni nomadiche che provenivano da quest'area, dalla Mauritania fino, come si può dire, al Centrafrica. Perché? Perché si tratta di popolazioni nomadiche che da sempre, vi ricordate la parola magica che vi ho detto prima, erano dediti al nomadismo del traffico. Cioè da sempre hanno avuto una funzione carovaniera di scambio fra nord e sud, già all'epoca degli antichi romani. Perfino nel film Il Gladiatore, che avrete sicuramente visto, avete visto che i gladiatori spesso erano presi nel modo in cui venivano presi gli schiavi. E questo, diciamo, modo di essere è diventato, diciamo, sovrapposto alle tendenze purtroppo molto negative che stiamo vivendo. Per cui tutta una serie di traffici, quello di droga, quello di armi, quello di esseri umani, sono finiti per sovrapporsi al jihadismo. E oggi una delle fonti principali di finanziamento del terrorismo di quest'area è appunto la connivenza fra traffici e terrorismo. E di fatto tutto questo rende il Sahel un hub particolarmente ospitale, l'hub del terrorismo 2.0, quello che rischiamo di avere, che l'Europa rischia di avere di fronte a sé per i prossimi anni, proprio per questa sovrapposizione. Guardate che questo non è uno schema isolato. In Afghanistan come si può dire, la coltivazione e il traffico di stupefacenti è stata una leva incredibile per i talebani e per il qaedismo, che hanno avuto forme di finanziamento e di attecchimento proprio per questo motivo. Quando noi siamo di fronte a persone che sono alla fame, che non hanno più come abbeverare le proprie bestie, che, come si può dire, non trovano una soluzione alla loro vita, alla fine, se non c'è lo Stato e soprattutto se non c'è l'Europa, se non c'è l'Occidente che aiuta, finiscono per avere la forma di economia più diretta nei traffici illegali. E siccome i traffici illegali poi alla fine sono in larga parte, fatti dalle stesse persone che alimentano il terrorismo, alla fine si crea una convivenza implicita anti-Stato che fa diventare una hub del terrorismo. Oggi il Sahel è il principale hub, insieme, ma in misura molto ridotta, ai Balcani. Anche lì ci vorrebbe un'altra lezione per guardare quella specificità, che minaccia l'Europa. Chiudo. Tutto questo vi fa capire, spero in maniera chiara, che il tema del Sahel per l'Europa e per noi non è una cosa di altri, è, come si può dire, il bacino dal quale può essere messa in discussione la nostra sicurezza. Gran parte delle armi che sono servite per gli attentati compiuti in Europa erano transitate da lì. Una parte delle persone e dei capi che oggi hanno ispirato gli attentati e la crescita delle cellule in Europa e in Occidente sono transitati da lì. E oggi noi non possiamo chiudere gli occhi. Se c'è una cosa che ci deve far recuperare anche il senso e il valore dell'Europa per il futuro, è quello di capire che l'Europa, ce lo racconta l'Ucraina, ce lo racconta l'enorme crisi nel Mediterraneo, non si regola, non può pensare che i propri confini si pacificano e si regolano da soli. Noi in questi anni non abbiamo fatto tutto quello che dovevamo nella Libia, nel sud della Libia e ora anche nel Sahel. Ed è appunto una generazione come la vostra che deve, come si può dire, avere le idee chiare su quello che sta accadendo e avere una visione che occuparci di queste cose non è un dettaglio, ma è il cuore della sicurezza del domani e del futuro dell'Europa.
Thanks a lot to Professor Manciulli, to Andrea, that had the ability of summing up in a few minutes probably thousands of pages of lecturers and conferences and lessons on the issues, and this is really incredibly worthy. What I noticed the most from the words of Andrea is the fact that we are facing at the moment a hybrid threat when we talk about terrorism, radicalism, violent extremism, with all the difference that may have the terms. Just in order to tell you the big contradiction when we talk about Islam and the Muslim religion, probably just a very superficial reading of the Quran and Sunnah will show you how strong is the appeal of those pages against criminality, against illicits, against violence, against a lot of issues concerning what is not licit, not legal. And yet, paradoxically, the most important part of financing, of resources, of connections for terrorists or jihadist terrorists is exactly coming from criminality and all illicit activities all over Africa and especially in some regions. That's why this is a period in which Stratcom, which is strategic communication, is flourishing and blossoming more and more in European institutions and also in non-institutional organizations in order to unmask the contradictions of terrorists or radicalists that try to cover under the religious umbrella probably all the contradictions that they are living in this moment. But unfortunately, as Andrea remembers and reminds us, is the void of the state, is a lack of the state, is a lack of institutions that unfortunately, when we talk about immense regions as the Sahelian ones, is really a plug. And Europe, international community, are trying to do their part, especially focusing on training and capacity building on institutional building, because this is what we need the most there, a return of trust and linkage between people, normal people, ordinary people, vulnerable people, and institutions, because unfortunately the link has been cut. And in this void, there is a proliferation of this horrible plague, which is terrorism. Thank you, Andrea, again. And if I well understood, because I saw some movements on the screen, probably we might have Hawa Ibrahim, lawyer for human rights, Sakharov Prize by remote, ready to delight us with her words. Hawa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and good morning.
Good morning. We hear you very well. The floor is all yours.
Thank you for having me. Can you bring me to speed? Because I was actually flying into Boston from Denver, Colorado, so I have missed the beginning of the meeting. Bring me to speed what has happened and what do you want me to answer to, and I'll be a bit more specific to that.
Hawa, we were talking about the plague of terrorism, violent extremism, and radicalization, especially focused in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have seen the plague, the phenomenon, from different perspectives up to now, from an institutional perspective, from a security perspective, from a social perspective, and economic perspective. Probably your mastery in human rights may add absolutely some important added value to the discussion by touching and by interpreting the phenomenon, what is happening, especially in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, in the Great Lakes, in the littoral state of the Guinea Gulf. Maybe some of your insights in terms of linkage between violation of human rights and the phenomenon of the terrorist will be very much appreciated by the room. What do you say?
Sounds excellent. This is like a mouthful. And so nice to see all of you. And I'm so delighted to join you via Zoom from Boston. It's a rainy day, and it's a wonderful time to sort of connect on this issue of terrorism. I have worked for a long time in a specific region. So when you are talking about the Sahel and other part of the continent, the challenges may not necessarily be the same. It's going to be more contextual. My work has been mainly in the northern Nigeria with the group called Boko Haram. Before the Boko Haram group, I had written a book called Practicing Sharia Law in Sharia Court, the 7th strategy of how to achieve justice in Sharia court. And before then, I was born and raised in the northern part of Nigeria, in the region where the Boko Haram is active. So I'll bring you only a perspective of this conversation. I did work a lot with Al-Shabaab in the Kenyan region and Somalia and Sudan, Janjaweed, and a little bit of ISIS in Jordan. So maybe during Q&A we can hear, let me speak to what people want to hear. That would be great. Well, let me give you a bit of an overview of my take. The language terrorism, the word terrorism, could be, when you talk about the phenomenology of it, when you talk about the essence of it, you could look at it from different directions. Some people will call it terrorism, or the action of the people doing some terrorist things, terrorist action. Some people will call it freedom fighting. Some will call it a different thing in different contexts. Then we have another layer of who interpret what is that word and how is it being interpreted, in what context is being interpreted. And so that is another different kind of discourse. My work with the Boko Haram specifically was on issues, on different layers of issues. First is the operation of the Sharia in northern Nigeria, which was in 2000. So the law of Sharia was introduced and it became a big deal globally. And so we had a big focus on why introduce this law that will stone people to death, will cut limbs, will crucify people. And that was year 2000. Now this is 22 years after, what has happened, what is going on. We can have that conversation at some point. But that was actually part of the beginning of my work with the issue of Sharia. But I said I was born and raised there. I am now living in the United States. I had a lot of gigs still hanging around Harvard, first as a lecturer, and I'm now an examiner for other professors coming into Harvard. And over my stay, both as local in my community where I was born and raised, the issue of terrorism was really not there. So something has happened within the context of a bigger picture, you are speaking about structure, or you mentioned earlier on about trust, about governance. Something has happened that triggered some misnomer within society that brought to forbear these antisocial behaviors, and how all of us now are potential victims of these antisocial behaviors. And so for me, it's what is that thing? And I spent some time trying to interrogate the philosophical base of the phenomenology of violence. And I don't want to go into that because I don't know the audience. I want us to just limit it to just dropping some few points, and in Q&A, if people are specific, I'll speak to the matter. With Boko Haram, it started as we want to do jihad. We want to do the work of Allah. This is somebody's interpretation of jihad, which has been interpreted in a different context differently altogether. And because we want to do jihad to convert people into Islam, we want to do it our way, and sometimes it's by force. We want to force it on people. But if you remember the Holy Prophet, may peace be upon him, when he gave his last sermon, he said, there is no compulsion in religion. Actually, it's chapter 49, verses 13 of the Quran. There's no compulsion. There's equality of men and female. The only thing that differentiates us between us, female and female, is our righteousness or our piety before the Almighty. So when you think about the concept of jihad to convert people into Islam, I think it's a misnomer. Now, when Boko Haram started, they think that Western education has brought in so many vices that is away from piety, away from righteousness. So we may all be going to the same destination, but it's how we get to that destination in a way. So that is part of what Boko Haram was doing. And they now remove themselves from the realm of trying to convert people into becoming a realm of the criminals, because their activities scale through a lot of hurdles, and they now have become terrorist activities in action around what they do that has made the society really unbearable. And now we have a lot of kidnap around the issue of terror. And when you switch over the gear and look at the Janjaweed in the Sudan area, or the Al-Shabaab in the Kenya area, there is one mission they have. They want to do the work of Allah. They want to do, especially the Muslim aspect of it, the Islamic. But there is an issue here of the interpretation and the translation of text, which when you mix it into the social media, which I think is one of the big things I wanted to mention here when you talk about terrorism, the oxygen of a terrorist is the media. And when you blow it out within the media, they get that oxygen to keep on going. And so to round up so that I can allow you to ask me a specific question, is that it's all contextual, isn't it? And we all have to look at it from, we have to remove ourselves and put a lens of the other person to see what we want to see. I agree there is a structural issue, there is a trust issue, there is a governmental issue, there is a social issue, there is a human rights issue. But another issue I wanted us to consider in this conversation is when you have your Western lens, you have your Western gaze, looking at terror from a different angle, and which information are you feeding on? You may need to maybe take another gaze from another angle to see from which lens are they also looking at it. And from an internal perspective, how is it that they are where they are and where do they want to go? So it's great to have a conversation the way we are having, but I think we should also try to look a little bit outside our comfort zone with another different lens, not our lens, because that will help us a little bit. And to interrogate more. I think the more we think we know, that is what we really need to know. And that is just what I want to say. And I just want to listen to Q&A if you have a session of Q&A on specific issues that have just dropped, so that I can address some of this issue directly.
Thank you, Awa. Thanks a lot, and please. We were sure about the added value of your intervention, and thank you for having reached us in all this moving, and really a little bit envious that you are in Boston, my beloved Boston. You know, just I feel a little envious being here, even if we are in one of the most important and beautiful cities in the world. Hawa told us something that is very important. This is the misinterpretation of the Holy Scriptures. Me, myself, as ambassador to Sudan for 4 years, I dedicated a lot of evening by talking to Sufi brotherhood. You know that there is a big difference in Islam when you talk about and when you talk with jurisconsult, jurists, or experts in Quran and Sunnah, which are literally attracted by the texts, and when you talk about the Sufi groups, because in the first case, a Muslim must have fear of God. For a Sufi, a human being must love God. So it's a tentative, it's a try to become as God, not become a slave of God doing whatever he wants me to do. That's why Sufi have always been also an incredible target in places like Afghanistan or in other parts of the world, because of their way of interpreting and this Pacific way, not always Pacific in history. In Somalia, we have groups of Sufi that took weapons and started also violent conversion of people. But generally speaking, we are talking about a way of interpreting differently what you see in the Holy Scripture. And one of the most important words I would like to highlight is the term jihad. The term jihad today, especially for uneducated, ignorant, youth, vulnerable people, is represented as a physical battle, as taking a knife, taking a rifle, and going and destroy the infidel, the non-faithful, the demon. Jihad, in the real sense of a Muslim Holy Scripture, is spiritual fight, is the fight against our subpersonalities, against our shortcomings, our defects, our pride, our shortcomings as human beings, in order to be more and more close to God. By starting from this important concept, you may imagine how easy it may be in Islam and Muslim to have a different interpretation even of a simple sentence, because it's very easy that you may find one jurisconsult, one jurist, even the most unknown one, that has left a written trace in some book or in some place on a personal interpretation which has not been confirmed by other jurists, other experts, and other important people and expert and lecturer in the issue. This is more or less how it's easy to interpret in a distorted way, in a perverted way, the Holy Script. And Hawa reminds us how this has been probably also one of the most important tools in order to convince uneducated people, ignorant people, vulnerable people, people in need to follow violent extremism and to become radicalized to the point of using violence against, most of the time, their people, other Muslims, their brother. So really, thank you very much, Hawa, for this insight that you gave us, that plunged us into the issue of identity, the real identity of terrorism, of terrorists, and of the protagonists. And we will come back maybe in an questions and answer session at the end, if we have spare time. But for the moment, again, a big applause from the place to Hawa. Well, I wonder if Domenico Bruzzone, from the real, probably one of the places where the void, the primary needs lack, the problems is felt, like Burkina Faso, I wonder if Domenico Bruzzone is in connection with us. I just asked the Regia if there is any connection with Domenico Bruzzone. Domenico Bruzzone from the AICS, Agency of International Cooperation? No, we don't have Domenico Bruzzone. It's a pity because, no problem. It's a pity because I can tell you, in this particular moment of our life, foreign policy is not only politics, is not only economics, is not only geostrategic or military or security. In this moment, development cooperation is one of the most important sectors of foreign policy, and the more we go on training and trespassing, capacity building to people in need, the more we can try to add drops in the oceans against this phenomenon of organized criminality and of illegality into countries like the Sahelian ones or in Africa. Okay, so I would say that now it's the floor for our friend Abdelkader Filali. He's a general director, as I said, of the International Center for the Research for the Prevention of Children Soldiers. Probably you know that the United Nations has a special envoy, especially for this issue, and Italy has spent and reversed a lot of money and resources and initiatives because it's one of our most favorite battle in the world, jointly with the moratorium for the death penalty and the defense of human rights. So I leave the floor to our friend Abdelkader, and I'm sure, okay, he will get the podium, and I leave you, not yet, maybe you can push again. Yes, that's okay. The floor is yours. Thank you, Abdelkader.
So my name is Abdelkader Filali. I'm a professor of political science at Ottawa University. I teach international security, radicalization. By the way, my thesis in my PhD was mainly based, I had the opportunity to interview former Al-Qaeda members who were in prison, both in Jordan and in Morocco. So I understand the complexity of the issue. So actually, I'm the president of the International Research Center for the Prevention of Child Soldiers. I think we are three main centers in the world that are a bit specialized in this phenomena. And I won't call it a phenomena, it is a crime of war. So the main outlines of my intervention is going to be focused on these three main aspects. So probably briefly, I'm going to start with a short introduction about the international law, international humanitarian law, and the big question. And I'll be giving a brief introduction about the center, which is right now located in Dakhla, in the southern provinces of Morocco. So when I teach my students at Ottawa University, I focus on this particular statement. If you want to be a good analyst, a good reporter, history matters. So I'm not going to come on the 70s and do a snapshot of history and build an ideology on the 70s in the Cold War era. History is a long durée. It's a long duration. I cannot kind of cut history in a particular moment and build an ideology, whatever it is. So history matters. And I mean, when I spoke about the international humanitarian law and the international human rights law, what we have noticed is that there are sometimes some shortcomings, sometimes some limitations in the international humanitarian law. As you can see, while the international humanitarian law presents a regulatory framework aimed at preventing the recruitment of children, there is still a void in terms of rules. Yes, there is a Red Cross. We see Red Cross all over the world in time of crisis, intervening, trying to come up with a formula to support those people in need in time of crisis. Yet, there is limitations in the international humanitarian law. And then the United Nations come up with this convention on the humanitarian right and children right to simply trying to fill that void. Yet, even with this attempt, with these initiatives, yet still there is a gap. So this is, by the way, our center. So I think our center and other centers who are working on this crime of war could fill that void. So we will be asking why in particular we will be filling that void. So some of the warm up in my presentation, probably talking about a child soldier. A child soldier is mainly a child who is under 18. There used to be a lot of debates in terms of age and time frame of when do we call a child soldier and when we do not. So it is mainly to save a bit more of time. So it's under the age of 18 years old, and we are going to depart from this conception of child soldiers. So the term militia in my presentation is going to be kind of related to sometimes ideological militias, pro-Marxist, communist militias, and sometimes terrorist groups. I think the guest did well in presenting a different perspective in those terrorist groups. They have given names of Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and the immense experience of those honorable diplomats, Emmanuel Del Rey, Mr. Andrea, and Professor and Honorable Ambassador to Sudan, right? So probably we start with those stats. So it is alarming. So I didn't want to put those statistics in here to kind of trying to attract attention. But this is a serious matter. Sometimes, so you know that 15% of those child soldiers are girls. Sometimes other institutes, such as some Canadian institute, they would say it is for 40%. And I understand this difference between 15% and 40%. Why is that? I believe a good researcher, by the way, is someone who does research in the field. He goes in there and lets the field speak for itself. Let's forget about ideologies, about what do we have or what do we take in classes, but when we go to the field, let the field speak by itself. This is probably one advice to those future researchers doing research in the future. So we realize that some child soldiers are girls, but they want to hide their identity as being girls. So they cut their hair and they put bandages in their bodies in order not to be intimidated or bullied. Or bullied in the time of crisis. So they have to be more masculine, more powerful in order to evade violations and rape by adult soldiers, unfortunately. So the big question in our center is we try to investigate this a vicious cycle. We called it a vicious cycle. We don't look at the symptoms of child soldiers. We look at, probably Professor Emmanuel Del Rey just mentioned something like an integrated approach, an integrated probably framework. And we do the same thing when we try to investigate the question of how does a child soldier become a child soldier. So, I mean, the literature all over the world suggests that in time of conflicts, international community, let's say European Union, the United States, Canada, African Union, try to support those people in need with humanitarian aid. But the big question is, when this humanitarian aid is stolen, what will happen? So what do we expect? As you can see, climate change, humanitarian aid theft, and we get into a cycle of radicalization and then a production of future terrorists. Probably if we have time, or if you have time in this, probably after we can discuss this. You see the third picture of a sheikh, a man trying to teach some kids about some verses of the Quran. So what will happen, probably if you can recall the Ted Kaczynski, there's by the way a movie in Netflix about Unabomber. So Ted Kaczynski, and the guy who came up with this notion of forensic linguistics. So if I have time, you can ask me later. Those writings, those meme, noon, wow, they are not coming from the eastern side or the Middle East. They are mainly North African. And I can show you, probably if we can have time later, if we do some of those forensic linguistics, we can detect the region from where those people are coming. So so that's the word forensic linguistics. So you see the words. So by the way, I'm coming from North Africa. So I was born in Morocco. My studies was in Canada. My academic studies was in Canada, but I can tell those letters written in the Arabic language are, in particular, for those who are, familiarized with writings of certain segments of North Africa. So right now I'm going to talk about this shift of child soldiers from the Cold War. We used to see them in the, let's say, in Colombia with the FARC, F-A-R-C, Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. They used to recruit those kids. You see those pictures. So in the Cold War era, we used to see those green uniforms, military green uniforms. So right now we are moving into a different era. So we are right now moving into Daesh, the Islamic State, so we are moving into a different uniform. A small coat with a belt in their tummies, and the most important thing is reciting verses of the Quran. Reciting verses of the Quran, let's say mentioning the word of jihad and trying to misplace that word. So as the honorable guest just mentioned, when you say jihad, for example, if someone is smoking, then you can say to him, oh, okay, I'm going to do jihad on myself by quitting smoking. So it is an exercise probably against addictions. It could be an exercise about bad habits, about lying. So and this connotation of jihad has been taken a different angle of the analysis. So we are right now entering into a tunnel, a tunnel of no return. So what you can see right now, it has been bit developed, a Sub-Saharan in Africa, in the desert, yet they still have connection to the internet. They can have access to the, Mrs. Ibrahim mentioned the power of the media. So they like very much to be on the scene and to be shown and to have that impact globally. And then we will be producing and creating those innocent kids at the age of 12, 13, 14 years old who are becoming a weapon of war. So this is the cycle. This is our main argument in the center. And we try to disrupt this vicious cycle. Professor Andrea mentioned something about this cycle. He talked about drug trafficking, narco trafficking, arm trafficking. Sometimes there is organ trafficking. Can you imagine small kids of 12 years old? Their kidneys and their heart have been taken where they are alive and then sold in the global black market all over the world. So we can start with this idea of climate change. Climate change equals insecurity, forced displacement, and it takes a different direction, which we will be talking about refugee and human trafficking. Then we will have, I think in the Sub-Saharan Sahel, what we have right now in the field right now, and this probably you don't see that much in the media, we have lords of conflicts and lords of smuggling. They are with their Toyota Land Cruisers, pickups in the African Sahara, using drugs, selling cigarettes, kidnapping, and trying to show off in the region. So right now it's becoming like a trademark in the Sub-Saharan Sahel in particular. So then the European Union and other organizations send supply, medication, shelter, milk, and other stuff to those people in need. Yet, as I said, when this humanitarian aid is stolen, we will get into this theory of economics, the demand and supply discrepancy. So the demand is high and supply is short. So what we have, the vulnerability. So a lot of people are in need, and we get into forced labor, and we get into intercontinental crimes. Then we go into this big tunnel, which is youth radicalization and terrorism, and the end, no return. The belt and detonation. There is no return at this vicious cycle. So that's why treating child soldier from its symptoms does not work. So looking at it, as Professor Emmanuelle Delray mentioned in her intervention, an integrated approach. And Professor Mrs. Ibrahim mentioned something about the lenses. So, I mean, going to the field and working in the field and meeting people and having a discussion with people and looking at those people in their eyes, and you will understand a totally different perspective from a perspective that is prescribed by technocrats. So probably, I hate to say this word, supply chain for child soldiers. And this is unfortunately the reality. There is a supply chain of child soldiers. And I put a political economy approach to the child soldiers, which is mainly a replication of the vicious cycle. Then at the end, we will be helping and supporting indirectly the making of child soldiers. So I had the chance to meet with Saadani Ma'lainin. She was a girl at 12 years old. She has been taken forcibly from the camp of Tindouf to Cuba, where she spent her life in the Cuban islands at the age of 12 years old, with more than 8,000 kids to be trained. She told her story, she told her narrative. But as researchers, I'm a researcher, do we have to take those narratives into account, or do we have to verify them? So we have to verify them. So we went back to two Cuban intelligence officers who fled Havana to France. Juan Vives, in his book, so Juan Vives' code in the Cuban intelligence used to be Il Magnifico. Daniel Alarcon's code name in the Cuban intelligence was Benicio. So both of them, they told stories about how they used to train those kids in the Cuban island. Daniel Alarcon said something horrible. He said that he used to train those kids with traditional bombs. And most of the time, those bombs explode in their hands. And they used to carry their bones and bury them in secret cemeteries right now in Cuban islands. And then there is a different narrative coming from, let's say, from those camps. We call this in social sciences triangulation, in order to give credibility of what Ma'lainin just said. We use triangulation. The credibility of her narrative can be found in Juan Vives and Daniel Alarcon. It could be found in the narrative and stories in the camps. So our center situates itself between the international humanitarian law and the international human rights law. And by the way, we accept researchers from all over the world. We accept 15 researchers a year coming to spend a month in the center. It's like scholarship. We select those applications. They can spend a month in there, work in any case. We could have researchers coming from Philippines working on the Abu Sayyaf group, probably researchers coming from Indonesia working on the Al-Jama'ah Al-Islamiyah in the northern part of Indonesia, in the Bali island. There could be other researchers coming from Sri Lanka or coming from Colombia and El Salvador and Guatemala working on this particular question. Our center has, for the time being, 3 main offices, one in Cameroon, and we will be having another one in Colombia, in Bogota University, and one in Pakistan to cover the South Asian region. So our vision, so simply to prevent the use of child soldiers. So this is the first time probably you hear this. Academics should go into action. We're not going to publish booklets and books and keep them in the shelves. We are going to have an impact on those, to have an impact and to have a say to those taking decisions, to those making laws and legislations all over the world. So I spoke about the mission. So we are not going to focus on research per se, but a targeted research into change. There must be change. because this crime of war is getting worse and worse. So the values, I think one of the key value of our center is the first one. Every child soldier matters. What we have noticed when we did a scanning of those centers, we noticed that some cases are included in the reports, whereas other cases are rejected in their reports for the simple reason for the ideological background of a researcher. So that's why in the beginning I was talking about history matters. A good researcher has to be well equipped with history, understanding history, and understanding history, not segments of history, but history of a long durée, history of a long duration. Why we have chosen Morocco? So me and José Provençal is the executive director of the center. She's from Quebec. We come up with this idea. We realized what we have. By the way, we spent our applications in Ottawa to 8 different countries. And the first country to have a response immediately was Morocco. Morocco is ranked 11 in the world in terms of supporting United Nations blue beret and blue uniforms to support humanitarian actions in time of crisis. There are other initiatives in terms of bringing Libyans, Syrians, and even Malis together in some international accords like Schirat Accords and the Tangier Accords, when bringing Libyans together to have a peace process in the region. This is our center. Some of the visits we had in our center, we had pilots, small jets pilot who came from Europe, representing Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Spain, who came up to the center for peaceful process. So they had a visit there. We had lawyers coming from Mauritania. We have, as you can see, a civil society from Dakhla city, composing 6 women, as you see them, representing 6 different organizations. We have students coming from ENCG, École National School of Commerce and Management. We have diplomats coming from all over the world visiting the center and having where we can go with this center forward. Inclusion in the exclusion. This is a very important proverb from the African continent, and we believe in this. A child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So including those people in need, vulnerable people, is key to minimize the intensity or tension of terrorism, radicalization. Urgency. So there is right now an international urgency. So it's not a matter of staying in 5-star hotel and spending good time. It is becoming right now a necessity to disrupt that vicious cycle and the need for an international action. And I think you could be part of that international action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you, Professor, and I'm not surprised at all that such a lecture comes from Morocco, where has been highlighted for years for the fight to extremism, the fight to radicalization, the schools for imam, and all the initiatives, private and institutional initiatives against this perverted interpretation of Islam and of Muslim religion. And thank you very much also because, again, with this intervention, we may have the first idea that comes up from all distinguished guests is that terrorism, radicalism, violent extremism are not phenomena that can be only combated and fought by a top-down approach, but especially the bottom-up approach from civil society, from the cooperation on non-institutional parts, that probably is the key to go on fighting. And also I liked very much what he said, because speaking also to people, to radicalized people, gives us the idea on how today is important to deal with intercultural lens, to see things with another perspective, with the perspective of the others, in order to understand better the phenomena, and probably also to make a fine-tuning of our solutions and our response. Okay, we are up with the intervention, and we still have our friend also online. I would say that with the help of somebody for logistics that maybe may have another microphone here, if there are any questions and answers, okay, slow down, that's okay. We will try to give everybody a moment to speak. Thank you.
Buonasera, innanzitutto grazie mille, e sono Sabina Adriani del secondo anno di Global Governance. E inglese? Ok. My name is Sabina. I'm from the second year of Global Governance, and I have two questions. One is directed to the Professor Andrea Manciulli, which is, it originates from something that he said, which is, he said that China is somehow fighting terrorism in the Uyghur province. And I wanted to know more about this, because a lot of UN agencies actually accuse China of violating human rights and persecuting Uyghurs for their race. So I wanted to know how these two things kind of merge. And the second question is more general to whoever wants to answer, which is, how should the EU act and help these countries, the African region in general, when the African region has been affected so much by colonialism, neocolonialism, and how can we act and help them, but without having negative effects on these countries, their economy? Thank you.
Senza dubbio, diciamo, la Cina ha degli standard di contrasto a varie forme di problemi che non sono gli stessi dell'Occidente, e li applica anche alla lotta al terrorismo, devo dire con risultati non positivi, nel senso che quell'area sta intensificando la presenza di terrorismo, anche perché le minoranze turcofone di quell'area sono presenti in diversi paesi, e come è successo già fra Afghanistan e Pakistan c'è una porosità di confine per la quale diciamo magari la testa pensante dei movimenti terroristici uiguri non sta in Cina, per cui la via repressiva si rivela spesso inefficace. Lo dico in generale, non solo per la Cina. Quando alla NATO riflettevamo su quale era la NATO, quindi un'organizzazione politico-militare, qual era la via giusta per contrastare il terrorismo, stavamo lavorando, poi la cosa si è un po' arenata, anzi spero che in qualche maniera questa cosa venga ripresa, su uno standard operativo che comprendesse due volani: quello repressivo, che è naturalmente quello più evidente e anche necessario, perché il terrorismo va contrastato anche con la forza, ma accanto ad esso ci voleva, diciamo, uno standard preventivo. Questo standard preventivo, cioè questa parte preventiva del contrasto al terrorismo, è sempre più necessaria. Quando io ero parlamentare e ho fatto il decreto antiterrorismo ha prevalentemente un carattere repressivo. eravamo relatori del provvedimento, che poi diciamo è operativo, è oggi, come si può dire, la norma che regola il nostro antiterrorismo. Ci eravamo resi conto insieme all'altro relatore, io ero relatore per la parte appunto difesa, intelligence, e invece Stefano D'Ambruoso, il magistrato, era relatore per la parte giustizia. Abbiamo fatto un lavoro che è durato molto, diciamo, con il Ministero degli Interni, con tutti, diciamo, il Ministero della Giustizia. Ci siamo resi conto, facendolo, e io poi questa riflessione l'ho portato anche in sede NATO, che senza una legge per il contrasto preventivo alla radicalizzazione violenta è impossibile combattere il terrorismo. Questa cosa è evidente di fronte al terrorismo conclamato, ma è ancora più evidente rispetto alle nuove forme del terrorismo. Vedete, lo dico in maniera molto semplice perché non c'è tempo, ma la vera differenza fra Al-Qaeda e Daesh è stata che Daesh ha reso la minaccia del terrorismo molto più seria. Perché mentre Al-Qaeda era un'organizzazione terroristica che proiettava in là nel tempo la visione ultima e la finalità ultima di costruire un califfato islamico, Daesh ha portato, diciamo, nella parte, diciamo, prossima, quindi nel futuro prossimo, l'idea di costruire uno Stato islamico. Questa cosa non ha avuto un effetto soltanto pratico, perché voi avete visto, negli anni di Daesh che avrete visto, si è provata a costruire un vero e proprio Stato, patria, diciamo, del terrorismo di matrice jihadista e di quel modo di vedere la società. Ma ha avuto un impatto soprattutto dal punto di vista mediatico, perché costruire una patria che ha una bandiera, che ha una sua immagine, ha fatto crescere enormemente la cosiddetta jihad mediatica. Naturalmente per jihad mi associo alla definizione molto giusta di chi mi sta accanto. Jihad è un termine generico che vuol dire un profondo male, ma anche una cosa molto positiva. In questo caso si sta parlando della parte della degenerazione negativa. La nascita della jihad mediatica ha fatto sì che tante persone giovanissime, infatti il pubblico di Daesh è molto diverso da quello che era quello di Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda aveva dei militanti che stavano in una fascia d'età fra i 25 e i 35 anni, fortemente islamizzati e colti dal punto di vista, diciamo, della dottrina. Daesh invece ha colpito una fascia di popolazione che stava fra i 15 e i 20 anni, molto spesso con una cultura islamica molto basica, ma che invece subivano la fascinazione mediatica. Ecco, quando te hai di fronte un pubblico fatto in questa maniera, di persone che sono minorenni e che prima di diventare dei terroristi conclamati cominciano a simpatizzare con un fenomeno. Daesh usava i videogiochi, avevano fatto una modifica del famoso videogioco Call of Duty in Call of Jihad, proprio per sensibilizzare le popolazioni molto giovani. Quando te hai persone che sono fatte fisicamente così, cioè che sono più giovani di voi e che in qualche maniera intercettano la simpatia alla jihad giovanissimi, non puoi usare la repressione. Senza la prevenzione il terrorismo non si combatte. Ecco, in Cina la parte preventiva è totalmente assente e quindi la lotta al terrorismo di quel genere è condannata, a mio avviso, all'inefficacità assoluta. Quando, siccome sono tempi nel quali si comincia a riflettere sui valori fondanti, qui siamo al Centro Studi Americani, che secondo me è una grande istituzione, noi viviamo in Occidente, siamo per il valore e per i valori, la democrazia, ma non basta dirlo in maniera astratta. Dove si vede la supremazia della democrazia? Anche in questo, che prima della pena c'è la volontà di prevenire, perché fa parte, diciamo, è un fondamento della società democratica. La Cina, diciamo, non ha lo stesso standard.
Grazie. Thank you. And in order to complete also the question of our colleague, I can tell you that the EU-AU, African Union dialogue in Africa is very advanced in terms of cooperation for the phenomenon. And as a lot of lecturers in Africa, they said in 10 years, probably we as European, we will have to change completely our vision on Africa, because the most of important institutions and leaders and dictatorships that are now leading Africa will disappear. So the important thing will be to intercept and to link with the new leadership, the new youth in Africa, also for this phenomenon. Please.
So, good morning. My name is Rebecca Zolleta and I'm a second year GG student, sorry. My question was for the lawyer and Professor Ibrahim, because Ibrahim spoke about how media are a huge instrument in the hands of the terrorists. So my question was, which instrument should we adopt to prevent terrorism in this age of technological innovation, since we do not have a few or no regulations? Thanks.
Let me speak to three things quickly. Thank you, Rebecca. So nice to hear your voice and to see all of you when the camera pointed at you guys. I just felt so good. So good to see you guys. Let me make some, in the risk of sounding like a broken record or too academic, I'll just make three quick statements. The first is that only 3% of what is published globally is online. So if your research is only basically in Google or any search engine, just know that 95% of what you are supposed to reach out to, you may lose it. So just remember to go beyond and above the little we get online as a search machine in Google or any of the search machine that we use. Now, with respect to your question, Rebecca, before I get to that, I also want to mention, because the last speaker mentioned something about history, and I think he is apt, he is absolutely on point on that. But who writes the history? What history? Whose history? And I think we need to interrogate it a little bit more as we look at the presentation that I think is amazing. And he brought in the facts in some part of the world, and he mentioned issue of climate change. Actually, all this is an intense force around building a secured world for us, for your generation, and for the generation yet unborn. But there is need for us to go beyond, like he was saying earlier, to go just beyond the peripheries and dig deeper. Now, I asked the question, what do the terrorists want? And how do we help reduce it? And that will answer part of the question of this media. What do they want? It's contextual, isn't it? It's who you are talking to. If you are talking to Al-Shabaab, if you are talking to the Daesh or the ISIS. I spent 1 year in Zatari in Jordan. And the question the mothers were asking, what do they want? And I asked the same question to Boko Haram, what do you want? We want to do the work of Allah. We want a righteous world. We want a world where we share in the bounties. And then the bigger question, who does the world belong to? Who does the world belong to? When we sit in our comfort position, wherever we find ourselves, to have this bigger conversation that could lead us to where we will understand one side of the terrorist actions and activities. I am not in any way standing in that, trying to take brief or explain what they want or how they want it, but I want us to look at the bigger picture. Who does the world belong to? And I'm trying to say this is not my question. It's somebody actually a member that was asking this question, and there's a lot of theories to interrogate on that. And when you look at the terrorists about what they want, I want to suggest to you that we all want the same thing. We all want to go to bed, close our eyes, sleep. We want our families to be safe. We all want the same thing. Their interpretation of it is of a different direction, but we all sort of want the same thing. And even when I spoke to the mullahs in Afghanistan and elsewhere, we all end up in the same angle. And for me, it's now the next question, how do we get there together? And I want to say, Mr. Ambassador, and our dear speakers, the two of you that spoke, I can see on my screen, the three of you, that you have pointed out to the direction on how we can get there. But let me add to what you have said. GG is an amazing institution, the Global Governance Program in Tor Vergata. And I tell you what you have done, you as GG students, that you are trying to reduce this violent extremism and make the world a better place. And one of this is what we did in the institution with some of your students, 5 students this year. You came to Nigeria and you went to internally displaced people camps to give alternative to violence using science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. This is just a drop in the bucket. But maybe it's that drop that makes the bucket fill. So you are playing a part in trying to be present and to give an alternative to violence in project and program in different communities. And I mentioned just one. Now I mentioned the terrorism feed on the media, and I'll end it here. I see the ambassador taking the microphone to his mouth, and I'll end it here. What can we do with what we have? And I think this is what the global governance is enhancing almost all the students to look at. The media could be a source, is a double-edged sword. It cut on both sides. And if we want to prevent violence extremism, how do we use the same structure? And now we have to look at the major players of the media. And then we have to see how do we come in to disrupt. I like the word that you used, to disrupt. How do you disrupt what is there? And the major players are bigger than countries and nations and economics put together. They are much bigger. So it's not a fight that we can do, but we can do it as collective. And each of us has a role to play in a collective movement to reduce this violent extremism. And you can use the same gadget, the same media, the same Twitter, or you can even create your own. We discussed it extensively at our class last year. And I encourage you to read a little bit and to research a little bit. I remember we mentioned the social dilemma, and to see how the bigger media companies are taking over even our own reasoning and rewiring our mind. But we have to go beyond that and to see what action can we play individually to make the world a better place. And we can go into that discussion detail at some point.
Professor Hauer, thanks a lot. I'm sorry to be so brutal to interrupt you in your answering, but unfortunately we had noticed that we have another event here at 5 o'clock. So I would say that maybe we have space for one last questions, and maybe, yes, we may see one of those three. Okay, just 2 questions, but two very short questions and one even shortest answer. Thank you. First one. Okay.
So good evening to you all. I'm Nicola Molina, and I have a question for Professor Filari in particular. It's kind of specific. So you mentioned in one slide about why you chose Morocco for the center, because it's now one of the main countries about peacemaking, developing. So I wanted to ask you about the situation with the territory of the Western Sahara people, because as I think you know, the state of Morocco is giving a really hard time to them. They are struggling with the whole independence thing. So I wanted to know if your center is work also on that situation, because there could be a conflict of interest since the authorities really don't want to help those people. So I wanted to know if your center is doing some work and what type of work are they doing it.
Thank you. You're first, and the second one, the last one, is from?
Good evening. My name is Alexandra Joux and I'm a GG student. I have a question for Andrea Macciulli. Is it developing of the job market a way to fight the terrorism in Sahel area? And if yes, are there any ways to develop it as it may provide a lot of jobs for people and they can work from legally point of view right way instead of cooperating with terrorists?
Let's start with Professor.
Yeah, the question about your question. And I think the question we are trying to answer is preventing child soldiers. There was a case of Thomas Lubonga, who spent 14 years at The Hague for using those kids in armed conflicts. Lord Army has been implicated in recruiting, and we are working on this. And any particular side who is responsible for recruiting children will be prosecuted. That's our main goal. And we are documenting research, documenting narratives and stories from all over the world. We are moving to different places. We are even going to those cemeteries in Cuba to detect those realities. And I think the result is going to be harsher and harder. It's going to be harsh for those. I mean, it's getting serious, and that's why I think the question is scaring a lot of sides. Thank you.
La risposta è sì, aiuta. Tutto ciò che in qualche maniera prosciuga la difficoltà di uno Stato che non c'è più, di una società che non c'è più, riduce lo spazio per il terrorismo. Bisogna però, e qui lo dico solo accennandolo, non ridurre tutto solo a questo, a un fenomeno materiale. Il terrorismo si è nutrito molto anche della perdita di identità, soprattutto in Europa. Se uno pensa alle banlieue francesi e a quanto la crescita e l'attecchimento del terrorismo jihadista stia in quelle generazioni che sono più in difficoltà, oltre che materialmente anche nel difendere un'identità minacciata, diciamo, dalla società, ci si rende conto che è un insieme, è un cocktail di cause e noi non possiamo prendere la scorciatoia di occuparci soltanto di una o di un'altra. Dobbiamo prenderlo nell'insieme e ci vuole una strategia vera e propria. Questo è un po' il segreto dell'antiterrorismo.
So I have to say, unfortunately, it's time up. Thank you, everybody, for being here, for such attention. And remember, terrorism is a complex issue, and we need cooperation, but remember always that African solutions to African problems, which is our mantra. So thanks a lot, and till the next. Thank you.